The gunshot echoed across the Montana Territory wilderness like thunder, sending Katherine Winters stumbling backward toward the raging waters of the Yellowstone River. Spring melt had transformed the normally placid waterway into a churning monster, and as the loose soil beneath her boots gave way, she knew with horrible certainty she was about to meet her maker in those murky depths. It was 1876, and Katherine had come west with dreams of independence that now seemed foolish as the muddy bank collapsed beneath her feet. Her scream was swallowed by the roar of the river as she plunged into its icy embrace, the powerful current immediately sweeping her downstream. Through water-blinded eyes, she glimpsed the silhouette of her attacker atop the ridge, watching her disappear into the foam. "Help," she sputtered, fighting against the pull of the river while her sodden skirts threatened to drag her under. Katherine had always prided herself on her swimming ability back in Boston, but the Yellowstone was no gentle pond for ladies to bathe in during summer. This was nature unleashed, and it cared nothing for her 24 years of life or the plans she'd made. Just as her strength began to fail, hoofbeats thundered alongside the riverbank. A dark horse kept pace with her desperate struggle, its rider leaning dangerously from the saddle. "Grab my hand," a deep voice commanded. Katherine lunged toward the outstretched arm, missing once before her frozen fingers finally closed around a strong wrist. With a powerful heave, the stranger pulled her from the water's grasp and across his saddle horn. Water streamed from her clothes as the horse slowed to a walk, her rescuer's arm firmly around her waist. "Breathe, madam. You're safe now." Katherine coughed violently, expelling river water from her lungs before managing to look up at the man who had saved her. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the concern in his eyes as blue as the Montana sky on a clear summer day. "Thank you," she whispered, shivering uncontrollably. Someone shot at me." The man's jaw tightened. "Name's Noah Reed. Let's get you somewhere warm before you catch your death, and then you can tell me who's trying to put you in an early grave." Noah guided his horse away from the river, keeping a protective arm around Katherine as they rode. His warmth seeped through her soaked clothing, and despite her ordeal, she felt the first stirrings of safety she'd experienced since arriving in this wild territory. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, Katherine drifting between consciousness and a dazed half-sleep. When she fully came to her senses, they were approaching a modest cabin nestled against a stand of pines. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, promising warmth within. "My place," Noah explained, dismounting with fluid grace before reaching up to help her down. "Not much, but it's dry." Katherine's legs buckled when her feet touched the ground, and Noah caught her effortlessly, lifting her into his arms. Up close, she could see the weathered lines of his face, suggesting he was perhaps 30 years old. His clothes were worn but clean, the practical garb of a man who lived by his own hands. "I'm Katherine Winters," she managed as he carried her toward the cabin door. "I don't know how to thank you." "Staying alive would be thanks enough," he replied, nudging the door open with his boot. "Seems like somebody's gone to considerable trouble to prevent that." The cabin's interior was simple but neat. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a cooking area nearby. A bed stood in one corner, a trunk at its foot. A table with 2 chairs occupied the center of the room, while shelves held books more than Katherine would have expected in a frontier cabin. Noah set her gently in a chair near the fire. "You need dry clothes. I'll step outside while you change." He pulled a clean shirt and pair of trousers from the trunk, setting them beside her. "They'll be too big, but they're dry." "I couldn't possibly, madam. Propriety won't keep you from pneumonia. I'll wait outside." When the door closed behind him, Katherine peeled off her sodden dress with trembling fingers. The simple act of changing into dry clothing, even oversized men's garments, brought tears of relief to her eyes. She used a blanket from the bed to wrap around her waist, securing the 2 large trousers. "You can come back in," she called, once decent. Noah returned with an armful of firewood, which he added to the already blazing fire. Without comment, he filled a kettle and set it over the flames, then pulled a tin of coffee from a shelf. "The man who shot at you," he said finally. Any idea who he might be? Katherine sank deeper into the chair, drawing her knees to her chest. I believe he works for Lawrence Blackwood. Noah's hand stilled on the coffee tin. The railroad man, the very same. I arrived in Silver Creek 3 weeks ago to claim my uncle's property. He died last winter and left me his land in his will. She pushed damp hair from her face. What I didn't know was that Blackwood wants that land for the railroad's planned route. And Blackwood doesn't take kindly to obstacles, Noah finished, his expression darkening. He offered to buy the land, but the price was insulting. When I refused, the threats began. Katherine shuddered. Today I was returning from meeting with a lawyer in Helena when that man appeared on the trail. He said Mr. Blackwood had reconsidered his offer, then he drew his gun. Noah placed a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. Blackwood's dangerous. Men like him think they own the territory. I gathered that impression, Katherine said, taking a grateful sip of the strong brew. I ran when he fired the first shot. The river seemed safer than the bullet. Not by much, Noah observed dryly. A comfortable silence fell between them as Katherine warmed herself by the fire. Outside, the day was fading into dusk, casting long shadows through the cabin's single window. Are you a rancher, Mr. Reed? Katherine asked finally. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Noah, please, and no, not exactly. I raise a few horses, do some hunting and trapping. Guide work when it's available, he shrugged. Jack of all trades in these parts. A frontiersman, then. Some might call it that. Others might use less flattering terms. His eyes held a hint of something Katherine couldn't quite identify. What brought you all the way from Boston to Montana territory? Your accent gives you away, Katherine smiled ruefully. Is it that obvious? My uncle Jeremiah was my mother's brother. He came west during the gold rush of '63. Never struck it rich in gold, but he acquired a sizable piece of land along what is now the proposed railroad route. Lucky for him, less lucky for you, it seems. I had nothing left in Boston, Katherine admitted. My parents died 2 years ago. I was teaching at a girls' school when I received the letter about Uncle Jeremiah's will. She stared into the fire. It seemed like Providence, a chance to start fresh. Noah nodded thoughtfully. Montana can be a place for new beginnings. It can also be unforgiving to those who aren't prepared for its challenges. I'm learning that lesson quickly. Katherine set down her empty cup. I should return to town before it's fully dark. Not tonight, Noah said firmly. Blackwood's man could still be looking for you. Rest here. I'll take you to Silver Creek tomorrow. Katherine wanted to protest, but found herself lacking the energy. The events of the day had drained her completely. Where will you sleep? I've got a bedroll. The floor by the fire suits me fine. He stood, moving to check on his horse outside. When Noah returned, Katherine had already drifted off in the chair, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. Carefully, he lifted her and placed her on the bed, covering her with a quilt. For a long moment, he studied her face in the firelight, the delicate curve of her cheek, the determined set of her jaw even in sleep. What am I getting myself into? He murmured, before turning to prepare his bedroll beside the dying fire. Morning brought pale light filtering through the cabin's window. Katherine woke disoriented, momentarily panicking at the unfamiliar surroundings before the previous day's events rushed back. She sat up to find Noah already awake, cooking something that smelled wonderful over the fire. Good morning, he said, looking up from his task. Hungry, starving, she admitted, suddenly aware of the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. She couldn't remember when she'd last eaten. Venison and biscuits, Noah said, transferring food to a plate. Not fancy, but filling. Katherine accepted the plate gratefully. It looks wonderful. She took a bite of the tender meat and closed her eyes in appreciation. It tastes even better. They ate in companionable silence. Katherine noted how Noah moved with economy around the small space, everything in its place, nothing wasted. There was something comforting about his quiet competence. Your clothes are still damp, he observed after they'd finished eating. I can loan you a coat for the ride to town. Thank you. For everything, Katherine hesitated. I'm afraid I've put you in a difficult position. Blackwood has influence in these parts. Noah's expression hardened. I've dealt with men like Blackwood before. They think money and connections make them untouchable. Are you saying they don't? I'm saying everyone has vulnerabilities. He stood, collecting their plates. We should head out soon if we want to reach Silver Creek by midday. An hour later, they were mounted on Noah's sturdy bay gelding. Katherine sat behind Noah, her arms hesitantly encircling his waist. The proximity was improper by Boston standards, but such concerns seemed distant in the vast Montana landscape. "How long have you lived here?" Katherine asked as they rode. 7 years in this territory. Before that, Colorado, Wyoming, Dakota. His shoulders rose and fell with a shrug. "After the war, I couldn't settle back east." "You fought in the war." Katherine realized how little she knew about this man who had saved her life. Union cavalry. Joined up in '63, fought till Appomattox. His voice was matter-of-fact, but Katherine sensed the memories were anything but simple. "Came west afterward, like many men. To find peace." Noah was silent for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. "To find something," he finally said. "Still looking, I suppose." They crested a hill, and the town of Silver Creek came into view in the valley below. Even from a distance, Katherine could see the activity centered around the newly built railroad station. Silver Creek had grown rapidly in the past year, the promise of the transcontinental spur line bringing entrepreneurs, laborers, and opportunists of all stripes. "Where are you staying in town?" Noah asked as they approached the outskirts. "I've taken a room at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. It's near the—" Katherine stopped suddenly, gripping Noah's arm. "That's him, the man who shot at me." Noah followed her gaze to a man lounging outside the saloon, a distinctive red bandana around his neck. "You're certain?" "Absolutely. His name is Jenkins. He works as Blackwood's enforcer." Noah guided his horse behind a stand of buildings, out of sight from the main street. "Is there a back entrance to the boarding house?" "Yes, through the kitchen garden." "Good, we'll go that way." His voice was calm, but Katherine could feel the tension in his posture. "Once you're safely inside, I want you to stay there. Don't go out alone." "What are you going to do?" Katherine asked, suddenly afraid for this man who had already risked himself for her once. "Have a conversation with Mr. Blackwood." The steel in his voice sent a shiver down Katherine's spine. They dismounted behind the general store and made their way through back alleys to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. The elderly proprietress exclaimed in shock at Katherine's appearance, but asked no questions when Noah explained there had been an accident at the river. "I'll come back for you," Noah promised as he prepared to leave. "Lock your door." "Noah," Katherine caught his arm, "please be careful. Blackwood has the sheriff in his pocket." A grim smile touched his lips. "Not the first corrupt lawman I've encountered, Miss Winters." "Katherine," she corrected softly. Something shifted in his eyes. "Katherine," he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name. Then he was gone, slipping out the back door like a shadow. Katherine spent the next hours pacing her small room, alternating between worry for Noah and anger at the situation. She had come to Montana seeking independence, not to be imprisoned by fear. Her uncle's land represented everything she had hoped for, a chance to build something of her own, away from the suffocating propriety of Boston society. As afternoon faded into evening, a soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. "Who is it?" she called, one hand on the small derringer she kept in her dresser drawer. "Noah." Katherine unlocked the door with shaking fingers. Noah stood in the hallway, his expression unreadable. "May I come in?" Katherine hesitated, only briefly. Propriety seemed a small concern compared to her safety before stepping aside. Noah entered, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that seemed at odds with his otherwise rugged appearance. "Did you speak with Blackwood?" she asked, closing the door behind him. "I did." It was illuminating. Noah ran a hand through his dark hair. "Blackwood claims he knows nothing about any attempt on your life, says Jenkins was collecting a debt in Helena yesterday. He's lying, of course he is." Noah's voice was even. "But he's smart enough not to admit to attempted murder, even in private conversation." Katherine sank onto the edge of her bed. "So that's it, he gets away with it." "I didn't say that." Noah leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Blackwood made you another offer for the land. Triple his original price." "I won't sell," Katherine said fiercely. "That land is my future." "I thought you might say that." A hint of admiration colored Noah's tone. I may have mentioned to Blackwood that any further accidents befalling you would result in certain documents reaching the territorial governor documents, suggesting Blackwood has been bribing officials to secure exclusive railroad contracts. Katherine stared at him. Do such documents exist? The corner of Noah's mouth lifted. They could. Blackwood doesn't know for certain. Men like him always have secrets they don't want exposed. You bluffed him, Katherine said, impressed despite her concerns. It buys us time, nothing more. Blackwood isn't the type to give up what he wants. Noah straightened. Which is why I have a proposition for you. Katherine raised an eyebrow, waiting. Your uncle's land, how much of it have you seen? Very little, she admitted. I've been in town handling the legal aspects of the inheritance. Then you may not realize what you have. That property includes some of the best grazing land in the territory with reliable water sources. Noah's eyes lit with something that might have been excitement. Land like that could support a substantial herd. I know nothing about cattle ranching, Katherine said, but I do. Noah held her gaze steadily. I'm proposing a partnership. I have some savings, enough to purchase a starter herd. You have the land. Together, we could build something that would make your uncle's property far more valuable than what Blackwood is offering. Katherine rose, moving to the window. The street below was busy with evening activity, the saloon across the way already doing brisk business. Why would you do this? You barely know me. I know enough, Noah said quietly. I know you're brave enough to come west alone, smart enough to recognize Blackwood's schemes. And stubborn enough not to be intimidated. He paused. Those are qualities worth investing in. Katherine turned back to him, studying his face for any sign of deception. She found none, only a straightforward assessment that left her feeling both seen and respected. A business partnership, she clarified. Initially, yes, I would live on the property, build the herd, and help secure it against Blackwood's interference. You would retain ownership of the land, and we would split the profits from the cattle. Katherine considered the proposal. It made practical sense. Alone, she had little chance against Blackwood's influence and resources. With Noah's help, she might actually realize the dream that had brought her west. Very well, Mr. Reed, she said formally, extending her hand. I accept your proposition. Noah's large hand enveloped hers, warm and calloused. I'll make arrangements for supplies and cattle. We should move out to the property as soon as possible. Tomorrow, Katherine decided, a new determination filling her. I won't hide in this room while Blackwood plots. Noah nodded approvingly. Tomorrow it is. I'll collect you at first light. After Noah left, Katherine began packing her few belongings, her mind racing with plans and possibilities. For the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, she felt a sense of hope. Noah Reed was still largely a mystery to her, but her instincts told her he was a man she could trust, and in the Montana Territory of 1876, trust was perhaps the most valuable currency of all. True to his word, Noah appeared at dawn, a wagon loaded with supplies behind his horse. Katherine bid farewell to Mrs. Holloway, promising to return for visits when possible. The older woman hugged her tightly. Be careful, dear, she whispered. That cowboy of yours has a reputation. He's not my cowboy, Katherine corrected automatically. What reputation, Mrs.? Holloway glanced toward the door where Noah waited. They say he rode with Union intelligence during the war, that afterward he tracked deserters and outlaws for the government. She lowered her voice further. Some say he's killed men. Katherine absorbed this information, recalling Noah's evasiveness about his past. The war changed many men, Mrs. Holloway. Indeed it did, child. Indeed it did. Outside, Noah helped Katherine onto the wagon seat before climbing up beside her. They headed north out of town, following a trail that paralleled the Yellowstone River, the same river that had nearly claimed Katherine's life 2 days before. Your uncle's property begins about 5 miles ahead, Noah explained as they traveled. Extends from the river eastward to the foothills. Nearly 1,500 acres. Katherine's eyes widened. So much, no wonder Blackwood wants it. The railroad's planned route would cut right through the heart of it, Noah confirmed. But there's more to the land's value than just the right-of-way. As they crested a rise, Noah halted the wagon. Below them stretched a verdant valley, the river curving gracefully along its western edge. Spring had painted the landscape in vibrant greens, wildflowers adding splashes of color across the grassland. "Oh," Catherine breathed, the beauty of it momentarily stealing her words. "It's magnificent." "This is the eastern portion of your property," Noah said, a hint of pride in his voice as if he were already invested in the land. "Good water, good grass, natural boundaries to help contain livestock." For the first time, Catherine truly understood what she had inherited: not just acres on a deed, but a piece of America's promise. Her eyes stung with unexpected tears. "Uncle Jeremiah chose well," she murmured. "He did." Noah clicked to the horses and they continued down the slope. "The cabin is about 2 miles ahead, near a stand of cottonwoods." The cabin, when they reached it, was more substantial than Catherine had expected. Built of sturdy logs with a stone foundation, it featured a main room with a large fireplace, a separate bedroom, and a covered porch. Though dusty from disuse, it was sound and well constructed. "Your uncle was a better builder than most," Noah commented as they unloaded supplies. "With some cleaning, this will be comfortable enough." Catherine set to work immediately, sweeping and scrubbing while Noah tended to the horses and brought in firewood. By evening, the cabin had been transformed: windows washed, floors clean, fresh bedding on the bed, and a stew bubbling over the fire. "You're efficient," Noah observed as they sat down to their first meal in their new home. The thought gave Catherine pause: their home, at least temporarily. The implications of their arrangement suddenly seemed more significant in the isolated setting. "Boarding school teaches one to be organized," she replied lightly. "And teaching requires both patience and thoroughness." "What did you teach?" Noah asked, seeming genuinely interested. "Literature and composition, primarily. I had hoped to eventually open my own school." Catherine smiled at the memory of her former ambitions. "Now it seems I'll be learning about cattle instead of teaching about Chaucer." "No reason you couldn't do both, eventually." Noah's casual comment surprised her. "This territory needs educated women as much as it needs beef." The next weeks fell into a pattern. Noah worked from dawn to dusk, repairing fences, building a small barn, and preparing for the cattle he'd arranged to purchase from a rancher farther north. Catherine learned the rhythms of rural life: carrying water, tending a vegetable garden, baking bread in the Dutch oven. They were careful with each other, maintaining a respectful distance despite living under the same roof. Noah slept in the barn once it was habitable, insisting Catherine keep the cabin to herself. Their conversations over meals grew gradually more personal, snippets of their pasts emerging like stepping stones across a stream. "You never mention family," Catherine observed one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky. "Do you have any?" Noah was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. "Had a brother, younger, Daniel. He died at Gettysburg." "I'm sorry," Catherine said softly. "Parents passed before the war, father's heart, mother's grief." His profile was etched against the fading light, stoic and strong. No wife, no children. The war took those possibilities too in its way. Catherine wanted to ask more but sensed his reluctance to elaborate. Instead, she shared her own loss. "My parents died within months of each other. Father from pneumonia, mother from what the doctor called nervous exhaustion, though I think it was simply heartbreak." "And you had no other family?" A sister, married and living in Philadelphia, were not close. Catherine sighed. "She disapproved of my teaching, thought I should have accepted one of my suitors instead of pursuing independence." Noah glanced at her, a question in his eyes. "There were 3, Catherine admitted with a small smile. A banker's son, a shipping merchant, and a professor at the men's college, all suitable, all respectable. And all rejected," Noah finished, something like amusement in his voice. "None of them saw me," Catherine said simply. "They saw my family's modest connections, or my suitability as a mother for their children, or my abilities as a hostess. But not me." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Then Noah stood, breaking the spell. "Cattle arrive tomorrow," he said. "Best get some rest." The arrival of 200 head of cattle transformed the quiet property into a working ranch almost overnight. Noah hired 2 local men to help with the herd brothers named Joseph and William Parker, whose father had a small spread nearby. Katherine found herself adapting to the role of ranch mistress, cooking for hungry men and learning the vocabulary of cattle raising. One afternoon, a month after the cattle arrived, Noah appeared at the cabin door, leading a sleek chestnut mare with a white blaze down her face. "Time you learn to ride properly," he announced. "Can't have you dependent on wagons out here." Katherine approached the horse cautiously. "She's beautiful. Gentle too, name's Penny for her color." Noah held out the reins. "She's yours." "Noah, I can't accept. It's not a gift, it's a necessity," he interrupted, though his expression softened. "Consider it a business expense." Over the following days, Noah taught Katherine to ride not side saddle as she had occasionally done in Boston, but Western style, secure and practical. After initial nervousness, Katherine discovered a natural affinity for horsemanship, and soon she was accompanying Noah on daily rides around the property. During these rides, Katherine began to see her land through Noah's eyes, the places where water collected during spring melt, the draws where cattle sought shelter from wind, the subtle variations in grasses that indicated soil quality. She absorbed his knowledge eagerly, determined to be a true partner in their venture rather than merely the owner on paper. "You're a quick study," Noah commented as they paused atop a ridge overlooking the valley where their growing herd grazed. Summer had arrived in full force, the June sun warming the land. "I have a good teacher," Katherine replied, adjusting her hat against the glare. She had abandoned her Eastern dresses for practical split skirts and cotton blouses, her skin tanning despite her precautions. Noah's gaze lingered on her face a moment longer than necessary. "The Parkers tell me Blackwood's been asking questions about our operation." Katherine's mood sobered instantly. "What kind of questions?" "Size of the herd, how many men we've hired, whether we've had any trouble." Noah's expression was grim. "He hasn't given up." "What can we do?" "Be vigilant. I've spoken with some of the neighboring ranchers. They're no friends of Blackwood's, either his railroad plans would cut through several properties." "Strength in numbers," Noah nodded. "For now." "But Blackwood has resources we don't. Money, connections back east, political influence." "Then we need to be smarter," Katherine said with determination. "The territorial legislature meets in Helena next month. Perhaps I should present our case directly." "It's risky," Noah warned. "Blackwood will have representatives there. All the more reason for our side to be heard." Katherine straightened in her saddle. "I didn't come west to be intimidated by men like Lawrence Blackwood." Noah's expression changed, something like pride and another emotion Katherine couldn't quite identify flickering in his eyes. "No, I don't suppose you did." That evening, a summer storm rolled across the valley, bringing welcome rain but also spectacular lightning that illuminated the landscape in brilliant flashes. Katherine stood on the porch, watching the display, when Noah emerged from the barn, soaked from his last check on the horses. "Come inside," she called over the thunder. "You'll catch your death." Noah hesitated only briefly before striding toward the cabin. Inside, Katherine handed him a towel, trying not to notice how his wet shirt clung to the muscled contours of his chest and shoulders. "The horses are settled," he reported, running the towel over his dripping hair. "Penny's not fond of thunder, but she's calming down." "Much like her mistress," Katherine admitted with a small laugh. "Storms never bothered me in Boston, but out here they seem so. Immense." "Everything's bigger in the West," Noah agreed, moving toward the fire. "The land, the sky, the weather. The challenges," Katherine added softly. Noah looked at her then, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "The rewards, too." Something in his voice made Katherine's heart beat faster. In the 2 months since they'd begun their partnership, she had grown increasingly aware of Noah as a man, his strength, his integrity, the rare smiles that transformed his serious face. But she had carefully maintained the boundaries of their business arrangement, uncertain of his feelings and unwilling to risk their working relationship. Now, standing before her in the storm-darkened cabin, Noah seemed different, less the capable rancher and more the man who had pulled her from the river, whose touch had promised safety. A particularly loud crack of thunder made Katherine jump, breaking the moment. Noah stepped back, creating distance between them. "I should return to the barn," he said, though the rain continued to pour outside. "Don't be ridiculous," Catherine replied, practical once more. "You'll sleep here tonight. I'll take the bedroom. You can have the main room." Noah looked as if he might argue, then nodded. "Thank you." They prepared for sleep with careful courtesy, Catherine retreating to the bedroom while Noah arranged blankets near the fire. But long after she should have been asleep, Catherine found herself listening to the storm and to the occasional movements of the man beyond her door. The Helena trip was planned for mid-July. Catherine would travel by stagecoach, stay with the family of one of Mrs. Holloway's relatives, and attend the legislative session where railroad right-of-ways would be discussed. Noah would remain at the ranch, both to manage the cattle and to ensure Blackwood didn't take advantage of Catherine's absence. The morning of her departure, Noah drove her to Silver Creek in the wagon. They had barely spoken during the journey, an unusual tension between them. 3 weeks, Catherine said as the stagecoach was being loaded. "I'll send word if anything significant happens before then." Noah nodded, his expression guarded. "Be careful in Helena. Blackwood has friends there." "I will," Catherine hesitated, then impulsively reached for his hand. "Take care of our home." Something flashed in Noah's eyes at the word "our." But before he could respond, the stagecoach driver called for passengers. With a final squeeze of Noah's hand, Catherine boarded the coach. As the stagecoach pulled away, Catherine looked back to see Noah standing in the street, watching until the vehicle disappeared from view. Only then did she allow herself to acknowledge what she had been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with her business partner. Helena proved to be a whirlwind of activity. The territorial capital bustled with politicians, businessmen, and citizens all eager to influence Montana's future. Catherine found her relatives' home comfortable, but spent little time there, instead navigating the complex world of territorial politics. She met with lawmakers, presented documents about her property's agricultural value, and connected with other landowners concerned about Blackwood's railroad plans. Many were surprised to find a young, educated woman representing her own interests, but Catherine's articulate arguments gradually gained her a respectful audience. 1 week into her stay, she encountered Lawrence Blackwood himself at a social gathering hosted by the territorial governor. He was a distinguished man in his 50s, impeccably dressed and mannered, nothing in his appearance suggesting the ruthlessness Noah had described. "Miss Winters," he greeted her smoothly, approaching as she stood near the refreshment table. "I've been hoping to make your acquaintance." Catherine maintained her composure, though her heart raced. "Mr. Blackwood, your reputation precedes you, as does yours." His smile didn't reach his eyes. A Boston schoolteacher turned cattle rancher, quite the transformation. Adaptation is necessary for survival, I'm told. Catherine kept her tone pleasant, particularly in the West. "Indeed." Blackwood sipped his champagne. "I understand you've been quite vocal about the proposed railroad route. I've simply presented facts about the agricultural value of the land in question." Catherine met his gaze steadily. "Land that happens to include my property. Progress requires sacrifices, Miss Winters. The railroad will bring prosperity to the entire territory. I'm not opposed to progress, Mr. Blackwood, merely to the assumption that my sacrifice should be greater than others." Catherine set down her glass. Perhaps a route adjustment of just a few miles would preserve valuable ranchland while still serving the territory's needs. Blackwood's expression hardened slightly. "Alternative routes have been considered and rejected. By your company's surveyors, yes. But the legislature may take a broader view." Catherine prepared to move away. "If you'll excuse me." Blackwood's hand on her arm stopped her. "Your partner, Reed, he's an interesting choice for a lady of your background." The implied threat was clear. Catherine removed his hand with deliberate calm. "Mr. Reed's expertise has been invaluable. Now, if you'll excuse me, I see someone I must speak with." As she walked away, Catherine's outward composure masked inner turmoil. Blackwood's mention of Noah suggested he had been investigating them both and that he might use whatever he had learned as leverage. That evening, Catherine wrote a lengthy letter to Noah, detailing her encounter with Blackwood and the progress of her legislative efforts. As she sealed the envelope, she found herself adding a postscript. I find I miss our evening conversations on the porch more than I anticipated. Helena has many fine people, but none whose company I prefer to yours." The words seemed both too revealing and not revealing enough, but Katherine sent the letter anyway. 2 weeks away from the ranch had given her prospective life in Boston had never felt as right as her new existence in Montana, and Noah Reed was a significant part of that feeling. While Katherine navigated Helena's political landscape, Noah faced challenges of his own. A section of fence along the eastern property line was cut one night, allowing 30 head of cattle to wander onto neighboring land. Then the creek that provided water to the southern pasture was mysteriously dammed, nearly causing a small drought until Noah and the Parker brothers discovered and removed the blockage. "Blackwood's work," Joseph Parker said as they cleared the last of the debris. "Everyone knows he's trying to run you off. Takes more than childish tricks," Noah replied, though privately he worried about escalation. These incidents were warnings Blackwood demonstrating what he could do while Katherine was away. A week after Katherine's departure, the territorial marshal arrived at the ranch. Noah recognized Clayton Miller from his occasional visits to Silver Creek, a solid lawman who had managed to maintain independence from Blackwood's influence. "Reed," Miller greeted him, dismounting near the cabin. "Need to talk." Noah invited him inside, offering coffee which the marshal accepted gratefully. "Got word from Helena," Miller said without preamble. "Miss Winters has been making quite an impression at the legislature." "Katherine's persuasive," Noah acknowledged, pride evident in his voice. "She's also stirring up trouble. Blackwood's not accustomed to opposition." Miller leaned forward. "Word is he's been asking questions about your war record." Noah's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened around his coffee cup. "That was a long time ago, not long enough for some. Particularly that business in Missouri in '64. I followed orders," Noah said flatly, "as did every soldier. I'm not questioning that." Miller held up a placating hand. "Just warning you, Blackwood's the type to use whatever he can find as a weapon. Against me or against Katherine." "Both likely." The marshal stood. "Watch yourself, Reed, and watch out for her too. Blackwood doesn't like losing." After Miller left, Noah sat for a long time at the table, turning over the marshal's warning. His past contained shadows he'd never shared with Katherine, actions during the war that had been necessary, but far from honorable. The thought of Katherine learning about them from Blackwood made his stomach twist. That evening, a letter arrived from Helena. Noah read it twice, lingering over the postscript, a complex mix of emotions washing over him. Katherine's political efforts were succeeding, but at what cost? And her words about missing him, were they merely friendly, or did they hint at something deeper? Noah had been careful to maintain professional distance, not wanting to complicate their partnership with unwelcome attention. But in quiet moments, he had admitted to himself that Katherine Winters had awakened feelings he'd thought long buried, admiration that had grown into something more profound during their months together. He sat down to write a response, struggling to find the right words. Finally, he settled for honest simplicity. "The ranch misses your presence, as do I. Be vigilant with Blackwood. He seeks information about my war service, things I should have told you myself. We will speak of it when you return. Until then, know that my concern for your safety extends beyond our business arrangement." It wasn't a declaration, but it was more than he had previously revealed of his feelings. Noah sealed the letter, hoping it would reach Katherine before Blackwood's investigations did. The legislative session concluded with a compromise that satisfied most parties. The railroad would adjust its route slightly to preserve the most valuable agricultural land, including Katherine's ranch, while still maintaining an economically viable path. It wasn't a complete victory. Blackwood's company would still require access to a small portion of her property, but it was far better than the original plan. Katherine prepared to return to Silver Creek, her spirits high despite exhaustion from weeks of political maneuvering. Noah's letter had arrived 3 days earlier, its carefully worded concern warming her more than any flowery declaration might have. Whatever war service he referred to, she was certain it didn't change the man she had come to know and respect. The stagecoach journey from Helena was long and uncomfortable, but Katherine barely noticed, her mind filled with thoughts of home and of Noah. As the coach approached Silver Creek, she looked eagerly for any sign of him, but it was Mrs. Holloway who greeted her at the stage stop. "Katherine, dear. Thank goodness you've arrived safely." The older woman hurried forward, concern evident in her expression. "Mrs. Holloway, I wasn't expecting is something wrong." Katherine's happiness evaporated, replaced by foreboding. "It's your ranch," Mrs. Holloway said, lowering her voice. "There was a fire 3 days ago. The barn is gone and some of your stock." Katherine felt the blood drain from her face. "Noah, the Parkers, all safe, physically at least. Mr. Reed was burned trying to save the horses." Mrs. Holloway took Katherine's arm. "He's at Dr. Wilson's office now." Katherine barely remembered the walk to the doctor's small clinic. Inside, she found Noah sitting on an examination table, his chest and left arm wrapped in bandages. His face was drawn with pain, but his eyes brightened when he saw her. "Katherine." He started to rise, but winced, settling back. "Don't you dare get up," she ordered, moving quickly to his side. "What happened?" "Mrs. Holloway said there was a fire. Started in the hayloft, middle of the night." Noah's voice was rough with smoke and exhaustion. "Got all the horses out except one, lost about 20 head of cattle too." "Blackwood," Katherine said, the name like poison on her tongue. Noah nodded grimly. "Can't prove it, but yes." Dr. Wilson entered, nodding a greeting to Katherine. "Your partner's lucky, Miss Winters. Burns could have been much worse. As it is, he'll heal with minimal scarring if he follows instructions and rests." "He'll rest," Katherine said firmly, giving Noah a look that brooked no argument. "I'll see to it personally." After receiving care instructions from the doctor, Katherine arranged for a wagon to take them back to the ranch. The journey was mostly silent, Noah clearly in pain despite the laudanum Dr. Wilson had administered, and Katherine too full of conflicting emotions to trust her voice. When they arrived, the sight of the burned barn, now just a blackened skeleton, brought tears to Katherine's eyes. But the cabin stood undamaged, and in the pastures beyond, the majority of their herd still grazed peacefully. "Not as bad as it could have been," Noah said quietly beside her. "Bad enough." Katherine helped him from the wagon, supporting him as they walked to the cabin. Inside, she settled him in the bedroom despite his protests that he could sleep in the main room. "Don't argue with me, Noah Reed," she said, arranging pillows to keep pressure off his injured arm. "You saved our ranch. The least I can do is give you a proper bed while you recover." Once Noah was resting, Katherine busied herself preparing a simple meal. The Parker brothers had kept the cabin tidy in her absence, but she found comfort in reclaiming her domain, heating water for tea, slicing bread, arranging a tray for Noah. When she brought the food to the bedroom, she found him awake, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "You should be sleeping," she chided gently. "Wanted to be sure you were really here," he admitted. "The laudanum sometimes causes strange dreams." Katherine set the tray on the bedside table and sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "I'm really here, and I'm not going anywhere." "Your victory in Helena can wait," she interrupted. "Right now, your recovery and rebuilding the barn are more important." Noah reached for her hand with his uninjured one. "Katherine, there are things I need to tell you, about the war, about after." "Marshal Miller visited," she said, surprising him. "I saw him in Helena before I left. He told me some of it." Noah's expression tightened. "How much?" "Enough to understand why Blackwood thought he could use it against you." Katherine squeezed his hand. "You were an intelligence officer. You did things during the war that haunt you still." "I killed men," Noah said bluntly. "Not just in battle. Informants, Confederate sympathizers, civilians sometimes." "It was war," Katherine said softly. "That's no excuse for some of what I did." Noah's eyes held hers, as if searching for judgment. "After Appomattox, the government used men like me to hunt deserters, then outlaws. I was good at it, too good. Until one day in Wyoming, I tracked a man for 3 weeks, only to discover he was innocent of the crimes he'd been accused of. What happened? I let him go. Then I turned in my badge and headed north." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Eventually found my way to Montana." Katherine processed this information, comparing it to the man she had come to know. The war changed everyone it touched, Noah. What matters is who you choose to be now. Noah's eyes softened, something like hope replacing the wariness. When I pulled you from that river, I had no idea how completely you would change my life. The simple statement held more meaning than any declaration of feeling. Katherine felt tears threaten but blinked them away. "Rest now," she said, rising from the bed. "We'll talk more when you're stronger." The following days established a new pattern. Katherine took over management of the ranch, working with the Parkers to begin rebuilding the barn while Noah recovered. Each evening, she would sit with him, sometimes reading aloud from one of the books he kept, sometimes simply talking about the day's events. Gradually, Noah began to share more of his childhood in Ohio, his brother's death at Gettysburg, the darkness that had followed him after the war. In return, Katherine spoke of her parents, her teaching days, the restlessness that had led her to accept her uncle's bequest despite the risks. A week after the fire, Noah was well enough to sit on the porch in the evening. Summer was beginning its slow transition to fall, the days still warm but the nights cooling noticeably. Katherine joined him, bringing coffee and the ledger where she had been tracking ranch expenses. "The new barn will cost more than we anticipated," she explained, showing him the figures. "Lumber prices have increased since spring." Noah studied the numbers, nodding thoughtfully. "The cattle sale next month should cover it. We've lost some stock, but prices are good this year." "I've been thinking," Katherine said, closing the ledger. "About our arrangement." Noah glanced at her, his expression carefully neutral. "What about it? It's working well as a business partnership, but I wonder if perhaps—" She hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Perhaps." Noah prompted when she didn't continue. Katherine took a deep breath. "I've come to value more than just your expertise with cattle, Noah. Your friendship, your perspective, your—" She gestured vaguely, searching for words. "My presence," he suggested, a hint of something warm entering his voice. "Yes," Katherine met his eyes directly. "I believed I came west seeking independence. What I've found instead is that independence doesn't preclude connection." Noah set aside his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. "Katherine, I've been careful not to presume. You're an educated woman from a good Boston family. I'm a former soldier with blood on his hands and not much to my name beyond some horses and the clothes I wear." "Do you think I care about any of that?" Katherine asked, surprised by the vehemence in her own voice. "I care about the man who risked his life to save a stranger from a river, who partners fairly with a woman when most men would try to take advantage, who faced down Lawrence Blackwood and ran into a burning barn to save our livestock." Noah's expression softened. "When you put it that way, I sound almost respectable." "You sound like the man I've fallen in love with," Katherine said simply. The words hung in the evening air between them. Noah's eyes widened slightly, then darkened with an emotion Katherine recognized because it mirrored her own. "Katherine," he said, her name almost a prayer on his lips. "I've loved you since I watched you clean this cabin in your split skirt and determined expression, talking about Chaucer while scrubbing floors." A laugh bubbled up from Katherine's chest, joy mingling with relief. "That long?" "Probably since the river," Noah admitted, reaching for her hand. "But I'm a cautious man, had to be sure." "And now?" Katherine asked softly. "Now I'm sure of only one thing." Noah brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "That if you'll have me, I want to build more than a cattle ranch with you." The space between them seemed to disappear, and then Noah's lips were on hers, gentle at first, then with growing certainty. Katherine responded with all the feeling she had kept carefully contained for months, her hands coming up to frame his face. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Noah rested his forehead against hers. "I should speak to the preacher in Silver Creek." "Yes," Katherine agreed, happiness making her voice tremble slightly. "You should." 2 weeks later, on a perfect September morning, Katherine Winters became Catherine Reed in a simple ceremony at the Silver Creek Church. Mrs. Holloway cried openly, the Parker brothers stood awkwardly in their Sunday best, and Marshall Miller attended with his wife, giving the couple his official blessing. Lawrence Blackwood had departed for St. Louis shortly after the legislative session concluded, his railroad plans delayed if not defeated. Rumors suggested he had encountered financial difficulties, that required his personal attention, though Katherine suspected Marshall Miller might have had something to do with Blackwood's sudden departure. After the ceremony, the newlyweds returned to their ranch, now legally shared property, as Noah had insisted on a formal partnership agreement that protected Katherine's inheritance. The new barn was nearly complete. The fall cattle sale had exceeded expectations, and plans for spring expansion were already taking shape. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant golds and purples, Noah took Katherine's hand, the simple gold band on her finger catching the fading light. "Happy?" he asked, though her expression already told him the answer. "Completely," Katherine confirmed, leaning against his shoulder. "Though I still can't believe how it all began with a shot fired in anger and a fall into a dangerous river. Providence works in mysterious ways," Noah mused, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Is that what it was, Providence?" Noah considered the question, thinking of all the choices and chances that had brought them to this moment. His decision to ride along the river that particular day, Katherine's courage in building a new life, even Blackwood's schemes that had ultimately strengthened their resolve. "I believe," he said finally, "that sometimes life offers unexpected currents. The trick is recognizing which ones to fight against and which ones to follow." Katherine smiled, turning her face up to his. "Then I'm glad I followed the current that led me to you." As twilight deepened around their home, Noah pulled Katherine into his arms, grateful beyond words for the woman who had fallen beside a churning river and into his life. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, a partnership forged in adversity and sealed with love on the promising frontier of the Montana Territory. 5 years later, Katherine stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching as Noah taught their 3-year-old son Thomas to sit on his first pony. Their daughter Elizabeth, barely a year old, cooed in Katherine's arms, reaching toward her father and brother with chubby hands. The ranch had prospered beyond their early hopes. The Reed cattle brand was now recognized throughout the territory for quality stock, and their breeding program had attracted buyers from as far as Denver and San Francisco. The railroad had eventually come through on a route that benefited rather than threatened their operation, bringing new markets and opportunities. Silver Creek had grown into a proper town, with a school where Katherine taught literature 2 days a week, fulfilling her earlier ambitions while still managing the ranch's accounts. Noah had been elected to the town council the previous year, his steady judgment valued by neighbors who had come to respect the quiet man with the complicated past. "Mama, look," Thomas called as his pony took a few steps forward, Noah's hand steady on the lead rope. "I'm riding." "I see you, sweetheart," Katherine called back, her heart full as she watched Noah's patient guidance of their son. The former intelligence officer had become a gentle father, reading bedtime stories with different voices for each character and spending hours teaching Thomas about horses and cattle. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Katherine and Noah sat on their porch as they had nearly every night since their partnership began. The tradition had endured through building expansions, business growth, and the addition of children to their family. "I had a letter from Helena today," Noah mentioned, his arm around Katherine's shoulders. "The governor is establishing a commission on land use and water rights. Asked if I'd consider serving." "You should accept," Katherine said without hesitation. "Your experience would be valuable." Noah nodded thoughtfully. "Would mean some travel, time away from you and the children." "We'd manage." Katherine leaned into his embrace. "Besides, it's important work. The territory is changing so quickly." "Speaking of change," Noah said, a smile in his voice, "Mrs. Holloway tells me Blackwood's Railroad is facing competition from a new line coming up from the south. Apparently, his investors are nervous." Katherine couldn't help a small feeling of satisfaction. Lawrence Blackwood had eventually returned to Montana, though with diminished influence. Their paths crossed occasionally in Helena, but the railroad magnate had learned to treat the Reeds with cautious respect. "The wheel turns," she murmured, "though I can't find it in my heart to pity him." "Nor I," Noah agreed, "but his schemes did bring us together in a roundabout way." Katherine turned in his arms, studying the face that had become as familiar to her as her own, the lines at the corners of his eyes deeper now, silver threading through the dark hair at his temples, but the same steadfast character shining through. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked. "At the river, often." Noah's hand came up to cup her cheek. "I remember thinking you were the most determined woman I'd ever seen, fighting that current with everything you had." "I remember thinking you were an angel," Katherine admitted with a soft laugh. "Then I got a proper look at you and decided you were far too handsome to be heavenly." Noah chuckled, the sound warm in the evening quiet. 5 years later, and still the best decision I ever made was riding along that riverbank. "And the best fall I ever took was into that churning water," Katherine replied, rising on tiptoes to press a kiss to his lips. "Though I think the fall I took for you was even more profound." Noah's arms tightened around her, his kiss deepening with a passion that had only grown stronger through the years of partnership, parenthood, and shared dreams. When they finally parted, the stars were emerging in the vast Montana sky above their home. "Come inside, Mrs. Reed," Noah said softly, taking her hand. "Tomorrow we'll be here soon enough." As they walked into the house they had built together, Katherine reflected that her journey west had given her everything she had sought and much she hadn't known to dream of: independence, yes, but also belonging. Challenge, but also deep contentment. And in Noah, a partner who valued her strength as much as he cherished her heart. The river that had nearly claimed her life had instead delivered her to her future, a future that continued to unfold with each passing season on the land they loved, with the family they had created, in the community they helped to build. It was a story neither of them could have written alone, but together, they had found something truly extraordinary on the Montana frontier. They had found forever.